It's safe to say that the rift is widening between Israel and the United States after the 5-month-long Israel-Hamas war. Israel has had near full White House support to its goals of destroying Hamas and recovering the hostages. But now, Israel's closest ally, the U.S., is suggesting that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to manufacture a crisis in Israel-U.S. relations. The White House official made the statement after Prime Minister Netanyahu canceled a planned Israeli delegation visit to Washington. The trip was personally requested by U.S. President Joe Biden, who was hoping to offer a constructive approach to Israel's operations in Rafah. The Israeli Prime Minister had earlier threatened to pull out the delegation if the U.S. did not veto the United Nations Security Council resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza without condemning the October 7th attacks. When the U.S. abstained from the vote, allowing the resolution to pass, the Israeli Prime Minister followed through, canceling the meetings between Israeli and U.S. officials.
We're kind of perplexed by this. A couple of points that need to be stated and, in fact, restated. Number one, it's a non-binding resolution, so there's no impact at all on Israel and Israel's ability to continue to go after Hamas. Number two, as I said in my opening statement, it does not represent a change at all in our policy. It's very consistent with everything that we've been saying we want to get done here.
The public break-off of the in-person talks marked a strong illustration of what has become an increasingly fraught dynamic between Israel and its top backer. The incident is the lowest point so far in the ever-deepening rift between Biden and Netanyahu. Moreover, the White House expressed disappointment over the Israeli Prime Minister's remark. The U.S. was seeking to discuss Israel's planned invasion of Rafah, where nearly 1.5 million Palestinians are currently crammed and struggling to survive with severely limited access to shelter, food, hygiene, and medicine. According to the White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby, the Biden administration will still have opportunities to present its alternatives to a major Rafah offensive. In meetings with visiting Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, even though this will not be an alternative to the interagency gathering it was hoping to hold with other top Netanyahu aides later this week. All right, for more on this, we are being joined by Mr. Jacob Olador from Washington, D.C. He is Director of Research at GINSAW's Gemunder Center for Defense and Strategy. Thank you so much for joining us on WION, and welcome back. So, the Wall Street Journal's opinion page started by saying that in his State of the Union address, President Biden promised to bring all hostages home and would not rest until their loved ones, the family's loved ones, are home. The U.S. veto basically signaled that President Biden did not follow through with that promise. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, thank you, Susan, for having me on. First off, it's not a veto, it was an abstention, which is symbolic in its own right. I do want to return to the resolution itself.
Right.
You noted it doesn't mention October 7th, which is obviously a glaring omission given the horrific attacks of that day and the fact that families continue to mourn and reel from it. And, the other part, the reason for the lack of U.S. support is that it doesn't mention Hamas and doesn't condemn Hamas there. But the third, and this is really Israel's demand, it doesn't, yes, it calls for an immediate release of hostages. Yes, it calls for a ceasefire, but it doesn't make the release of hostages a condition for a ceasefire, which is Israel's key objective here. And it's noteworthy, I think, that on the very same day, Hamas actually rejected a U.S. brokered proposal to which Israel had agreed of releasing hundreds, by some count 700, Palestinian prisoners, many serving life sentences for murder of Israelis, in return for just 40 of the remaining 134 hostages. That's less than a third of the hostages, who are, by the way, innocent civilians. And so this, I think, tells you all you need to know about this war of necessity that Israel is fighting against Hamas in Gaza, and why Rafah, and I just want to correct your terminology. You called it an invasion of Rafah. It is the last piece of a critical operation in Gaza to eradicate Hamas's remaining stronghold of about 3,000 fighters there. It's important, and it will have significant impact, benefit, in fact, for the Gazan people themselves. who've been living under the yoke of this perverse and evil regime for about 2 decades. So yeah, I think that's very important context as well for what's happening.
Jacob, former President Bill Clinton and then President Obama and now President Biden, they seem to not be fans of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu really looking at history. What does this mean for U.S. Israeli relations moving forward? And are America's allies elsewhere watching this carefully?
Look, I think Israel is a democracy. It has the right, like every democracy, to choose its leadership. That's not for us to say our way in on. And certainly, there are differences. And as you noted, there was planning to be conversations, or still will be conversations, about Rafah to address some of those differences in policy. But I think that does not change the fact that this is a strong and enduring friendship between two close partners, the United States and Israel. And so I think that there's a lot that's missing kind of in this focus on maybe the personalities piece.
Very interesting. And some are saying that President Biden's politics right now regarding Israel are all local with the upcoming elections coming up. So, we'll be watching very closely. Thank you so much for joining us on WION this morning, Jacob Oladort, and I look forward to speaking to you again very soon.
Thank you, Susan.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.